Welcome to episode 390 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Meyers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I am interviewing writer Tim Long, who's written for the Simpsons TV show as well as the Simpsons movie and some of the Simpsons video games. He's on next week to talk about his new feature film called The Exchange, which is a dramedy about an exchange student who comes to America and lives with a dorky American kid. So stay tuned for that interview. As the final reminder before our final deadline for SYS's six-figure screenplay contest, the deadline is July 31st, so only a few more days to get your script entered. If your script is ready, definitely submit now. We're looking for low-budget shorts and features. I'm defining low budget as less than six figures, in other words, less than $1 million US. We've got lots of industry judges reading the scripts in the later rounds. We're giving away thousands in cash and prizes. I had last year's winners, Richard Pierce, on the podcast in episode 378. Definitely check out that episode. He won the contest last year and was introduced to one of our industry judges who took the script to Mar Vista Entertainment and got the film produced. So check out that episode to learn more about last year's winner. This year we have a short film category, 30 pages or less, so if you have a low budget short script, by all means submit that as well. And I've got a number of these industry judges who are specifically looking for short scripts too. Once again, if this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about or perhaps enter, just go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/contest. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 390. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. Teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. Teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing writer Tim Long. Here is the interview. Welcome, Tim, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Oh, I grew up in Exeter, Ontario, which is a very small town in Ontario, Canada, about, I'd say 4,000 people. And I guess I was just, like a lot of small town kids, I sought refuge in entertainment. My mother was a huge movie fan, so she would drive us into a nearby city almost every Saturday to see movies throughout the 70s and 80s. Sometimes not the most appropriate movies for kids, but we'd see them all. And like a lot of children, I also watched just a staggering amount of television. So it just sort of came to me naturally.
Gotcha. And so then you're growing up in Canada. What were some of the first steps to actually turn this into a career?
Oh, well, it was sort of a gradual, haphazard path. You know, as I said, I was always a big fan of comedy, a big fan of SNL, a big fan of the Letterman show. And so I went away to college at the University of Toronto, and I wrote a humor column there for the school newspaper. And then I decided at the age of 22 that, what the hell, I'll move to New York. Don't know what gave me the guts to do that, but I did it. I ended up writing for some magazines, including Spy Magazine, which was a pretty big humor magazine at the time. From there, I managed to get a job on the staff of the Bill Maher show, Politically Incorrect. And then from there, I worked on the Letterman show, including a year as head writer. And then I went to the Simpsons. So it's been a pretty fortuitous career.
Yeah, gotcha. So let's talk about that a little bit. So you moved to New York and then eventually get staffed on Politically Incorrect. What were sort of the things that were leading up to that? Did you have an agent by that point? What specs did you write? Was it just purely on your magazine writing? You kind of built a resume writing magazines. And is that maybe a pathway for screenwriters?
You know, I think that I'm sure that one thing you've discovered as we talk to various screenwriters is that every experience is different. My experience was that when I was a spy, it just so happened to be a time when a lot of late night shows were starting in New York. I'm talking about Politically Incorrect. I'm talking about the original Conan show, the Letterman show when it shifted to CBS. I like to say that it was a time when the merry-go-round slowed down just enough for me to get on. I knew a guy named Chris Kelly who'd been a staff writer at Spy, and he went to work for Bill Maher, and he suggested that I put together a package. So I watched the show, and I wrote a ton of monologue jokes, and I also wrote a few segments that were sort of designed to conform with the sort of thing that Bill was doing at that time. And I think Chris probably was instrumental in getting it under Bill's nose, and somehow they thought I had enough potential to bring me on board.
Gotcha. So let's talk about then. So then you worked politically incorrect. You said David Letterman. You've been on The Simpsons now for years. Let's just talk about that a little bit. How did you make those jumps? Once you got on politically incorrect, were you then able to get an agent, and then the agent was able to get you? Did you continue to write specs? Maybe just talk about that transition just a little bit. Ultimately landing on The Simpsons. What got you into that?
Sure. I didn't get an agent until relatively late. When I was on politically incorrect, I had my eye on the Letterman show because I was so besotted with him as a teenager and as a young adult. He was pretty much my comedy hero. So it was also a period when he had a weird system in place that was very brutal, but ended up benefiting me, which was that he was hiring a ton of writers, but also firing a ton of writers. I think people were getting like a 9-week tryout. So it felt like at the time that it wasn't the hardest thing in the world to get on the staff, but it was the hardest thing in the world to stay on the staff. So I wrote a package again that was sort of written according to the specifications of The Late Show. So I wrote a bunch of monologue jokes, but also a bunch of segment ideas and a ton of top 10 lists. And I managed to get them under the eyes of the head writers at the time, who were these guys, Donna Carey and John Beckerman. And again, they brought me in, and I met Dave, which blew my mind. And they brought me aboard for a tryout. And by then I had 2 or 3 friends hired at the Letterman show and fired at the Letterman show. And I just decided, I don't care if I have to hang on by my teeth. I'm not getting fired. So I remember that was probably the hardest I ever worked. In the week before I started there, I wrote a ton of material just to bank. And then on my first day, I just sort of like vomited it up and pretended that I'd written it that day. So they were like, wow, I can't believe how productive this guy is. So I remember people saying that was maybe the best first day anyone's ever had. And I was like, well, it took me 2 weeks to breeze all that material. So maybe it was cheating a little bit, but I didn't care. And I managed to get over the hump and get myself renewed for another cycle, then another cycle, and another cycle. And eventually they start thinking, okay, this guy can do the job. In terms of the getting on The Simpsons again, I mean, if there's one trend in my career, if there's one thing that sort of has remained constant, it's a tremendous amount of luck. I was done at the Letterman show. I was kind of a 28-year-old burnout. I was just like, this job is too hard. It's, you have to stay up late, and, it's just, there's no time to hone anything. I mean, it remains one of the most amazing experiences of my life, and I feel so honored to work there, but eventually it does kind of grind you down, the pace of it. And so I decided I was sort of going to take a break and maybe do something else. And then I found out that The Simpsons was hiring, and I was very lucky in so much as this wonderful guy named Mike Scully was running the show. And he was looking for somebody at the time who was not so much, they had some real heavy hitters in terms of story there. They had like George Maher there, and a guy named Ron Hauge, and Dan Graney, and a million great screenwriters. And what they really needed was some kind of young idiot who'd come in and like fire off a lot of jokes. And so Mike Scully was looking for that. And so I had an agent by that point. I didn't get an agent until I was actually on the Letterman show. But she contacted Mike and said, Tim is interested. And Mike said, sure, okay. I didn't have a spec. But he said, Mike is one of those guys who has great comedy instincts. And so he wants to meet people. He wants to know how they're going to get along in the room. So he said, well, if Tim can come out here to LA and just meet with me for breakfast, we'll see. And so I met with him, and it turns out we had a lot in common. We both grew up in very small, snowy towns. And I actually told him a story about one time. Snow days were a really big deal where I grew up. And one day we woke up and we were told the night before we were sure that a blizzard was coming. And we woke up the next day, no blizzard, devastation. We were so upset. And we went to school, and then the blizzard started, and we ended up having to stay overnight at the school. And I didn't tell that story for any reason other than to provide a little background on me. But he said, what, that could make a pretty good episode. And I ended up writing it as a Simpsons episode called Skinner's Sense of Snow. And after that, I think I probably had the job.
What a great story. I'm curious. I know you're kind of being humble and you say, oh, I've been very lucky with my career. One of the things that strikes me, though, is you're very good at sort of navigating these situations, going into the Letterman. I mean, going into the Simpsons at that point. Now, I mean, it had already been going for quite a while. So you were sort of breaking in. And I'm sure they had their own little clique and you had to somehow break into this clique of writers, head writers, etc. And, there's always this thing, being good in a writer's room. And it sounds like you have sort of those social skills to navigate that, but maybe you can give us some tips. How do you be good in a writer's room? If you're a new writer in that writer's room, what can you do to get in the favor of the head writers and the other people that are on staff and not get into these sort of petty jealousies? You always hear the stories of SNL that it's a real dogfight to get your skits in. And, I think we all probably would want to avoid that. But how do you get in these situations where you can kind of move along in these careers and get along with everybody and be good in the room?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's different everywhere. I mean, places like Letterman, back when I worked there, or SNL, I think there is an expectation that you need to produce right away. And that's a level of pressure that's kind of hard to fathom. At a place like The Simpsons, though, or at a lot of half-hour shows, it's best to take a deep breath and just observe, at least for the first week, I want to say, maybe 2 weeks. You'll get a lot more done if you just say, okay, what is succeeding in this room? What is the dynamic of this room? What do people expect from me? I mean, I would say that in most half-hour rooms, if you're a novice, if you're at the staff writer level or even the story editor level, you are not expected to speak up all the time. You are expected to show up on time. That's extremely important because, you see people who on the second day, they wander in 20 minutes late. And that is what I would call an unforced error. Show up, make sure you're paying attention. Don't look at your phone, listen to people. And then when you're be a sniper, I would say, if there's an opportunity for a joke, if they're like, we need a little joke from this character, jump on the ball, don't pitch too much. Don't, drown out everyone. But really think through your pitch and then give it your best shot. And if you get seriously, if you're a novice writer and you get a joke in the script your first day, a single joke, you're a legend. And don't be, and also, there's just so many things. There's people who talk too much. Don't be negative. I feel like, if the joke or if the story path that you're pursuing in the room, if it bumps with something else, it's similar to something you saw on television a couple weeks ago or something within the show's history, don't be the one to point it out, because then you're just going to be like the bump master. Or don't point out problems, create solutions.
Gotcha. Yeah, excellent advice. So let's talk about your new film, The Exchange. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick pitch or a log line. What is this new film all about?
Who decides that he's going to import himself an exchange student because he thinks that he's an exchange student from France, and he thinks this kid is going to be his sort of intellectual soulmate, and that they're going to be best friends, and he assumes that they're going to be so similar and that they're going to read a lot of French existentialist books. But it turns out that the kid he gets as an exchange student is kind of a handsome, sex-crazed maniac who could not be more different from him. And their adventures ensue.
And where did this idea come from? What was sort of the genesis of this story?
My life.
Is that right?
I think that I had an exchange student. He's very different from the character in the movie, but he was very handsome and very popular, way more popular than I ever was. And he commanded the attention of a lot of girls, which I emphatically did not. I would say that the thing I always tell people is the only character who's really similar to anyone in real life is me. I was that big a dork, and I was that deluded. And I look back on myself and sort of, I kind of slap my forehead, but I'm also kind of have fond memories of that naive kid who thought he was so smart, but had a lot of lessons to learn.
So let's talk about your writing process a little bit. Where do you typically write? When do you typically write? Especially something like this. This is outside of sort of your staff duties on The Simpsons. Do you write this on the weekends? Is this sort of like moonlighting? Are you doing spec scripts in addition to the writing that you're doing on in television?
Yes, all of the above. I tend to be, I hear a lot of people talk about how they wake up at 6 a.m. and they get a cup of coffee and they don't stand up until they've finished 3 hours of writing or 1,000 words or whatever. I am not like that. I have a ragged approach. I will wake up and do 6 minutes and then go get my coffee. I will lie down on the floor and do 8 minutes. I will grab 10 minutes on the weekend between, lunch and a movie. One thing that I've noticed is that I don't have a huge attention span, so I have to write when the mood strikes me, and I know that, and I sort of allow myself to just do a little bit of work before I get up again. Again, I'm not one of those people who can stare at a computer for 2 hours, and some people can, and God bless them, but I'm not that guy. And so, yeah, I just grab time whenever I can.
Gotcha. So on this one, with the exchange, how much time do you spend outlining, doing index cards, making outlines, versus how much time are you actually in final draft, cranking out script pages?
I would say that it's about, the relationship is probably 2/3 to 1/3. I would say I spent way more time outlining than I did actually writing the script.
Mm-hmm.
I was very fortunate in this respect. This story was born because of a spoken word essay I read at a sort of a comedy event. It was for charity, actually. Writers were asked to tell real life stories about their upbringing, and I told the story of my exchange student and my wonderful agent at CAA, this woman named Ann Blanchard. She managed to get it into the hands of a producer whom I had worked with previously, and he said, "We should develop this into something. What is it? Is it a movie? Is it a TV show?" We very quickly decided it wasn't a TV show, so we started to talk about it as a movie. And so I started to, I'm not really an index card guy. I'm more of a treatment kind of guy, maybe just because of my background in magazines. And I still, occasionally write for the New Yorker and places like that. I like to prose it out, as I say. I like to create like a 5 or 10 page document that says exactly what the story's about. And I did that again and again and again and again. And I kept sending it off to this producer in England. So basically I'd send it off at night. I'd wake up the next morning and he'd send it back to me with tons of red lines over it. And so I'd have to redo it, rethink it, and redo set pieces and the like. And eventually we got it to a place where we felt we could pitch it to some financiers, which we did. And luckily we had one company bite.
And so this is just a treatment. How long is this treatment? It's like a 5-page, a 20-page. How long is this treatment that you use to pitch to this company?
Probably like 10 pages. I think that
I gotcha.
Probably it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't want to, because you're pitching it orally. People's attention span doesn't tend to be much longer than 20 minutes, I find. You can sort of I've gotten really good over the years, both with The Simpsons and in my outside work, of looking at people's eyes and thinking and realizing and seeing that they're thinking about lunch, or they're thinking about their car, or about the fight they had with their spouse. So you really want to hold them. So I would say kind of you want to make sure to fill in all the details and give them a sense of the richness of the story. But other than that, I would make it the shorter the better.
Gotcha. You mentioned that 2/3 of your time is spent with creating these treatments, 1/3 in actually writing the script. I'm curious, why make the decision to go in and pitch the treatment? Why didn't you decide to write the whole script and start sending out the script? It sounds like by doing this very detailed treatment, you were quite close to actually having a completed draft of a script. Is there some benefit to just doing the pitch with a treatment versus having a full script for them to read?
The reason that we did it that way was because I was working with a producer, and he felt like the best approach was to go pitch it to these companies and get some money, first of all. I mean, it's always best to get some money before you start writing. Not a ton of money, but just a little bit of seed money to make you feel like, okay, you're on the right track. And also there's a feeling sometimes with certain producers and certain production companies, it's better not to write the spec. It's really depends on the circumstances, but sometimes they want to be involved in the creation from the foundation. And sometimes when you write a spec script, even if it sells, even if they really like the script, they're going to tear it down and rebuild it. So we were lucky enough to avoid that step.
Gotcha. So Tim, I really appreciate you coming on the show. How can people see The Exchange? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
Yes, on July 30th, it will be available on streaming, including on Apple TV. And it is going to be shown on select screens, at least a few screens in New York and Los Angeles. Okay,
perfect. Well, Tim, I really appreciate this fantastic interview. Good luck with this film.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best Of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing writer-director Michael P. Belvins and actor-producer Ford Austin. They just did a horror feature called Digging to Death. We talk about that film and how they were able to put that together. They both have a world of experience, both in acting, obviously, and writing, directing, but also in producing. So really interesting episode to really hear how producing takes place and sort of at this level, how you can put projects like this together. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's our show. Thank you for listening.